Well, hello, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever it is for you. Welcome to the Digging Deeper podcast. Jacob, what do we do here?
Well, what we do is we look at that week's sermon that Pastor Lee preaches, and we just simply dig a little bit deeper. The whole purpose of the podcast is to dig deeper into God's Word so we can dig it a little deeper into our hearts and apply it to ourselves.
Okay, good. Jacob didn't know I was going to have him do that, so I just wanted to see, does Jacob know what we do here?
Just to keep me on my toes.
Yeah, just keep you on your toes. Next time I'm going to have Judah do it. We are glad that y'all are here. If you don't know who I am, my name is Chris Brown. I'm the associate pastor here.
My name is Jacob Belding. I'm the outreach minister here.
And I'm Judah, the guy in the chair. Make sure to like and subscribe.
He remembered this time.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah. Well, this week, Pastor Lee preached on giving. Bum, bum, bum.
Yeah, that's right. There's a meme or something that I've seen on the internet where it's, hey, you finally convince your friend to come with you to church. And it's the Sunday that pastor's preaching on tithing and giving. And it's like, he doesn't normally do this.
Yeah, I promise. We don't use the word sow a seed of blessing ever. This is the first time he's used it. So Lee is going full prosperity now, right? Because a few weeks ago he preached on favor of God. Now he's preaching on giving.
Right.
No, we're just kidding. We're just kidding. This is our decade, or what's the word? Not yearly, but decadely giving sermon. And as he mentioned, we don't preach it to berate people. We preach it. Why? Because the Bible talks about it, and it's more than just giving your money. It's has to do with your relationship to God and your relationship to others, and so it's for sure worthwhile. We preach what's in the Bible. 2 Timothy, is it 2 Timothy 3:16?
Yep.
All Scripture is
breathed out.
Yep.
By God.
Yep, and useful for teaching, all that different stuff. So we get to talk about giving. Are you a numbers guy? Like a financial numbers guy?
Sometimes.
Yeah.
Sometimes. But normally numbers, I don't do numbers.
Yeah.
Like we were talking right before we started and, said, whenever I first came to church, I didn't understand. I didn't realize there was going to be math involved. 10% of this and whatever else. Like, there's numbers and there's math. And, we have calculators on our phones we walk around with now, but like math, ew, I don't like math.
That just made me think. So you know how like the tipping thing is getting out of control?
Oh my gosh.
So we don't even pass an offertory plate, but do you think that it's going to get to a point that the churches that do pass an offertory plate have like an iPad? You swipe the card and then it pops up. Would you like to give 10%, 15%? Or
that's what irritates me about those. And there's one place in particular that I really like going to. But every single time, it's the first thing they ask is, would you like to use your app? I'm like, no more room on my phone for all y'all's apps. And then the second thing, you go to pay, and then they hand you the card reader, right? You put the card in, and then they're like, and it's going to ask you a question. Like, it's super awkward.
Yeah, like we all know what the question is.
Yeah, there's a couple of prompts on there for you. Okay, there's one. But whenever you go to read it, it's, okay, here's your options, 10%, 15%, 20%, 25%, something like that, and then other. And so if you're just kind of like, I just want to get through this because this is awkward and I'm uncomfortable, I just want my food. And then it's like, what's the first thing that you click, right? 10%. It's a little bit manipulative.
Yeah. No, I, no shame at all, hit no.
Oh, I do the same thing.
All the time, man. Unless it's like an actual service industry. Right. So like if I go out to eat at a restaurant and have a waiter, of course I tip. But if it's like, so if I go to Starbucks or a coffee shop, which I order black coffee, like there is no prep involved. There is them turning around, filling it up and handing it to me. No tip, right? There was no service involved there. Now, if I ordered like a really like fruity drink and they had to like really go out of their way to do it, maybe. But no guilt at all. No feeling bad. No.
Oh yeah. And the place I go, it's a sandwich place, and the sandwiches are really good, but God, they're expensive. It's like $10 for just the sandwich, just about. And I said, it's really good, but it's like, y'all are getting plenty for this. Like, it's just bread and meat and cheese and some veggies. I mean,
okay, so the sermon has nothing to do with tipping, but now we're on it.
Now we're on tipping.
Me and Randy went to Texas Roadhouse the other night.
Nice.
And they have the little...
Did y'all go to Lake Worth?
The Lake Worth.
Is it nice?
It is nice.
Oh.
I mean, it looks like a Texas Roadhouse.
Okay, yeah.
But like everything looks new.
It's new, yeah.
And so they have the little like kiosk things that sit at your thing, which I like because you can just pay. And you don't have to mess around with cards and sending off and whatnot. But it brought up the tip screen, and the first option was 15%, 20%. 25% or other. And I'm like, back in the day, 10% was good.
Yeah.
Like, you did a good job, you get 10%. Now, I feel bad. Like, I picked 15%, and I felt bad for picking 15% because I'm like, oh, this is low. But I'm like, back in the day, 10% was good. Mm-hmm. When did this shift happen?
Well, so me and Sam went on a date recently, the past couple of months. We went to Olive Garden. Over in Waxahachie or Midlothian, somewhere in there. And the waitress wasn't very good. Mm-hmm. And so I'm like, so I didn't tip her much because...
Like on the tip line, you wrote, refill drinks faster. Like, that's my tip for you.
Like, do better. yeah, that's my tip. No, like I tipped. But yeah, she didn't appreciate how little that I tipped.
Oh, my wife.
Oh,
your wife didn't. Okay.
Yeah. No, we left before the waitress. I mean, we weren't like running away.
The waitress probably made a TikTok about it.
Yeah, more than likely. I can't believe it. It was only $3 and whatever, which is close to 10%. You know, anyway, what we spent. And but that was like the point of tipping too. Is like tip for good service, right? And if it's really, really bad service, you don't leave no tip, you leave a penny, because that's more insulting.
Oh, yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah, my grandpa taught me that one.
So it's just generational. Your family's bad at tipping.
Well, I mean, like he would tip, but anytime it was... So I think there was one time we were at breakfast at a cafe in Weatherford, and there was this table next to us. It wasn't us, right? It was the table next to us. They were mad about something and whatever, and so they're being, mouthy with the waitress, and so they get up and leave after they pay, and they left no tip, right? And so he's like, "Hey, here's a penny here. Go put that on that table. Let's see what happens." So we're trolling a little bit.
That's funny.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, Judah, are you a tipper? Do you tip well?
I do, actually.
You do?
Yeah. It's kind of just, you see that button, and you have to press it. So
the 25% button.
High score. I try to go for the high score.
High score.
So it's really for Gen Z. They've done studies and they know Gen Z will press the button.
That's what it sounds like.
Yeah.
In our small sample size.
Yeah.
I think we've got it nailed down.
Yeah. All right. We'll release our I'll release the study. You review it, and now it's a peer reviewed study. There we go. All right. How does this have anything to do with the sermon? It doesn't, but here's my connection. The sermon today is all about, or when the Bible talks about giving, it's out of a inward generosity and cheerfulness and a grace of God coming out of you. And the grace of God is not flowing out of us because we don't like to tip. So maybe we'll learn something today.
Apparently we have some growing to do.
Apparently we have some spiritual maturing to do. But anyways, you let us know, before we get too deep, you let us know, what do you think about tipping? Are you a tipper? Are you like, and I'm not saying like good service equals good tip. Like we all agree on that. But like the stuff like, I don't know, like you get checked out at the grocery store and they want you to tip, right? Like, I don't know if that's a thing, but I'm sure it's coming. Would you tip? Anyways, you let us know what you think.
If you go to self-checkout, do you get a tip from the store? From like Walmart? Walmart tips you for self-checking out and bagging your groceries.
Think. Anyways, let's get into the sermon. The title of the sermon is The Joy of Giving. We're just now at the recap of the sermon.
Like, don't get us started on tipping. Here we go.
The title of the sermon is The Joy of Giving, and it all focuses around this scenario that Paul was talking to the Corinthian church about the Macedonian church and an issue or situation that they were in and how they showed generosity to Paul. And Paul is using this as a teaching moment to the Corinthians, and the 2 Corinthians 8, chapter 8 is where the sermon is based out of, and Pastor Lee pulls out 2 points here, and one is that giving has an element of grace to it. He calls it the grace of giving, and 2 is that our giving is proportional to our means. So those are the 2 main takeaways, is that giving has an element of grace to it, and giving is proportional to our means. Any opening thoughts?
I have a lot of opening thoughts.
Or should we read the passage first, and then, or do you have...
Yeah, let's read the passage first.
Let's read the whole thing.
Yeah.
The 2 Corinthians 8, 1 through 7.
Yeah.
Which I just thought, while he does this, can you pull up that passage? And we're fancy now, and we have a way to like show y'all on the screen what we're looking at. So we're going to have Judah pull up that passage.
Yeah.
2 Corinthians 8, 1 through 7.
Now, do you have the NIV version?
I do.
Maybe
right
better
here.
this time to read NIV instead of ESV.
Is the terms a little bit different?
Yeah.
Okay.
The wording's a little different, and it works better for NIV this time, I think.
It's
All right, you got it pulled up? All right, NIV. All right, 2 Corinthians 8, 1 through 7 says this. And now, brothers, we want you to know about the grace that God has given the Macedonian churches. Out of the most severe trial, their overflowing joy and their extreme poverty welled up in rich generosity, which is an interesting statement on itself, but let's keep going. Verse 3, for I testify that they gave as much as they were able and even beyond their ability, entirely on their own. They urgently pleaded with us for the privilege of sharing in the service to the saints. And they did not do as we expected, but they gave themselves first to the Lord and then to us in keeping with God's will. So we urged Titus, since he had earlier made a beginning, to bring also to completion this act of grace on your part. But just as you excel in everything, in faith, in speech, in knowledge, in complete earnestness, and in love to us, see that you also excel in this grace of giving. And there was another verse. Oh, I see. That comes a little bit later. Anyways, that kind of sets us up. All right. Any thoughts?
Yeah, lots of thoughts, actually. So I like the there at the very beginning of the passage in verses 1 and 2. I like the sort of play on words, the reversal that's there. That was the first thing that came to mind. It's in verse 2, right? Their abundance of joy and their extreme poverty have overflowed into a wealth of generosity on their part. That's what the ESV says, anyway. So it's like, okay, they are poor, and yet
they're rich.
Yeah.
It's almost like a beatitude kind of thing. It's very poetic. One day I wish to be as poetic as Paul. But yeah,
it was, and I think it's kind of where is your what do you consider to be wealthy? Are you rich in giving? Are you rich in the spirit? Are you rich in the things of God, or are we content to be wealthy in material things? And it's kind of an idea that comes out there, and I liked it. I liked kind of the reversal there.
Yeah, and just to kind of set the stage for y'all, in case y'all didn't follow along, what Paul's describing here is that the Macedonian church supported Paul in his ministry, right? And financially speaking, and yet the Macedonian church was in poverty, right? And so even though they were in poverty, they still saw that as an opportunity to support them financially, and which is where you get that kind of play on words of, even though they were poor, they're rich, not in the sense of like financially, but rich in generosity.
So that was, that's really the first one, and they, and even this is in the midst of a severe test of affliction, and in that severe test of affliction, they have this abundance of joy, despite the fact that they're going through this affliction, despite the fact that they're poor, they still have this joy, right? And that overflows into this generosity, which is really really pretty cool to think about, and where these believers are. I mean, they really, to say they put their money where their mouth is.
Yeah. Yeah, and so all of this, Paul is trying to communicate to the Corinthian church that there are all these kind of like hidden blessings within a generous heart. And I think what Paul's trying to get at to the Corinthians is, I want you to have these blessings too, right? And I think it had much less to do, as we're going to see, Paul wasn't being like I heard this term this week, Paul wasn't being a prosperity pimp. Right. He wasn't.
That's a good one.
Yeah. He wasn't like trying to like coerce people to give him money and saying like, if you sow a seed of blessing of $100, then God's going to give you tenfold that. That's not what Paul was doing. In fact, what we're going to see later is Paul didn't even really bring up the subject to the Corinthians. The Corinthians brought up the subject to him and then didn't follow through with it. Yeah. And so there's actually now a couple of things going on here. One, it's like, are you going to be, a man of your word? Are you going to have your yes be yes and your no be no? And then two, it's also revealing like there might be something off on the generosity side of your heart. And this is why, so like me, I'm a cheapskate at heart. Are y'all cheapskates?
It depends.
Yeah, it depends.
Depends what the bank account looks like.
I'm a cheapskate at heart, but my wife, man, she's like super generous. I always say that her heart's bigger than her wallet. And so we're a very good balance because I'm like the realist of we can't do that. Like we don't have the money to do that. And she's like, here, take it all. And so she's kind of helped me, come a little bit more to the generous side of things, and to find, those blessings in that. Some of the most miserable people in the world are the ones like who are like tightly clenched onto their, not only their finances, but their time and their resources.
It's like in Matthew 6, Jesus talks about, sums it up with, hey, where your heart is, that's where your treasure is.
Yeah.
And one of the things that he goes on to say is, the eye is the lamp of the body. You basically don't have an evil eye towards your neighbor. And in the context of the whole Sermon on the Mount, Jesus is really getting at what whole person righteousness looks like. And so, you can't look at your neighbor who's in need, who may need help, for example, on one hand, and be stingy towards them, and then also be looking ahead at God's direction, towards God's kingdom. You can't have this sort of double vision. Right? You just can't do it. That's not how whole person righteousness works. And so, like Pastor said on Sunday, all over the place, Old Testament, New Testament, there's this theme of giving, right? And there's a reason that he preached on it.
Yeah,
it's important.
Okay, you brought up the Old Testament. Let's talk about it, because there's a sector of people out there that say the tithe is no longer a thing, right? Like we don't do the tithe. We don't. Some might even argue there is no tithe, right? Not even in the Old Testament. That if you really looked in the Old Testament, it's really not 10%. It's really like 27%. There's lots of nuance to that we probably won't get into, because not only were they dealing with giving their money to the tabernacle, the church, quote unquote, but you also had the nation of Israel. So there were like more like taxes also on top of that.
Yeah,
all that kind of plays into those different percentages that people come out to. But if someone said to you, hey, new covenant, no tithe, I don't have to give, what would you say to that?
I think that reveals more about the heart than it does the theology of it. I mean, Paul's pretty clear. Jesus is pretty clear. It's like, okay, what really matters to you? What is it? And when we see it here with these churches of Macedonia, like what really matters to them? Is it that they're able to sort of save up as much as they can, even though they're living because they're living in extreme poverty, and kind of keep everything really tight-fisted and to themselves? Is that really what's important to them? Like, no, for them it's the gospel, right? They're supporting Paul as he's taking the gospel around, and so they've received that hope, the hope of the gospel, and they've accepted the gospel, and they want to see the gospel spread, right? And so they find a way to be generous to help support Paul. And so I think, kind of getting away from like a number percentage, right? Because, you can argue that if you want, or people can argue that if they want to. I think it has more to do with like your motives, your heart motives.
So you're saying the Macedonian church wasn't saying, hey, we're in the new covenant. We're not bound by the law anymore. I don't got to give you anything.
No, I think it was out of the generosity of their heart.
Right, yeah. That would be like, if you think about it that way, it's quite silly to think of it. And so like, I think the people who say, oh, there's no tithe in the New Testament, therefore we don't have to tithe, they're almost having the flip side of a legalism coin. Because like, I think what they're trying to say is like, it's legalistic to tithe, but they're also like being so by the book that they themselves are becoming legalistic in like the negative inference of it. But I think so. So there's times in the New Testament. So when it comes to like the law, like the Old Testament law, there's times in the New Testament that it's like one of three things. They either reiterate it, effectively carrying it forward into the New Covenant. They, for lack of a better word, discredit it, or not discredit, but what's a better word?
Correct. Maybe.
Yeah.
Is that not what you're looking for?
More like do away with. So like the food law.
Okay. Yeah.
Like they do away with. So they explicitly say this no longer applies to us anymore, which means, okay, we don't got to deal with it. And then there's ones that like they just don't mention at all. It's just like neither in the positive nor in the negative. It's just not brought up. And so what some will say is only the ones that they reaffirm in the New Testament carry over. So if they discredit, don't have to deal with it anymore. If they don't mention it again, they don't have to deal with it anymore, and they just assume that's the case. And when it comes to like the specific tithe, as like the 10%, they'll say like, okay, because they don't reiterate it, therefore we don't got to deal with it. But then that's missing, like you said, all of these other passages that's getting into the motive of it. And I think that's why Jesus in the New Testament doesn't reiterate the specificity of it in terms of like a percentage, because they're trying to get away from the legalism of the tithe and more into the heart of the tithe.
Yeah, I agree. Because it's, you want your outward action to match your inward motive, right? That's what we want. Again, it's that whole person righteousness that we want to live out. And so if we're doing, if we're giving just to, eye roll and check the box, and our motives aren't good, sometimes, and, maybe I should preface this by saying, even if we're in anything else besides giving or tithing, all right, if we know the right thing to do is this over here, but we don't feel like it, like we still do that, right? Even though, we're not feeling it.
A spiritual discipline.
Yeah.
Discipline doesn't always feel good.
Right.
But you do it.
Yeah, exactly. And so giving can be the same way, even, right? Like I know that this is something that I ought to be doing. I know my heart should be in it. It's not, I'm going to go on and do it anyway and just kind of put that out there. And then the hope is that the heart and the motives follow. So it's not an excuse, right, to... for example, let's say I'm tired of living with this person and seeing them every day, maybe at work or
my
whatever.
heart's not in it.
My heart's not in it. Therefore,
it's a disservice to them to I'm going to love them well by just leaving.
Right. That doesn't work.
Right. Yeah.
So, it's definitely fun. It's a fun subject to talk about. It's giving. It's tough.
Yeah, and people can get just really legalistic about it. I've had the question asked to me, do you tithe on the pre or the post tax, right? And I usually tell people, I was like, if you tithe at all, you're already way ahead of the curve of the average person. But there's, again, like if you're getting that intricate into it, you might be starting to miss the point here. The point isn't a specific percentage as much as it is like what's going on in your heart in that. Yeah. And if you tithe on the pre-tax or the post-tax, as long as your heart is there, I think it's fine, wherever makes sense. I think it's C.S. Lewis, when talking about this, he said, do we do the tithe? Do we not do the tithe? And as far as the new covenant goes, and I think he landed on there's no specific tithe in the new covenant in terms of like 10%, but in terms of the heart, 10% should be the base of it. And if anything, we shouldn't go lower than 10%, but above 10% out of the generosity of our heart. And so again, New Testament digs much more into the heart behind it, much more than the percentage of it. Yeah. And just a note for anyone out there, we see not necessarily the tithe, but the terms of like offering and first fruits and giving back to God all the way back to the very beginning.
Oh, yeah.
Like Cain and Abel. That was the issue with Cain and Abel, was the offering, the first fruits that we're bringing to God. So we see it pre-law, we see it in the law, and then we see it post-law.
Yep.
So it tells us this isn't an era of Christianity that we can do away with. It's been there from the very beginning. God has entrusted things to us. Do you now trust God with that? And that's really what it gets back to.
Yeah.
Anyways.
Yep. Agreed.
We haven't even gotten into the points here. I guess we kind of touched a little bit into the points. But so bringing it back, Paul gets into this aspect. So in talking about the Macedonian church having that heart of generosity, supports Paul in his mission, and Paul uses this term, grace of giving. So in verse 7 of chapter 8, he says, "But just as you excel in everything, in faith, in speech, in knowledge, in complete earnestness, in your love for us, see that you also excel in this grace of giving." And so this may be one of the only compliments that Paul gives the Corinthian church. But he's like, you're doing so great in a lot of these other things, in faith, in speech, in knowledge, in earnestness, and love. Excel in this too.
Yeah.
Like there's this grace of giving that you still need to work on in that.
Yeah. Well, it's probably tricky. I mean, not tricky. Tricky's not the right word. It kind of makes you wonder, what the context looked like whenever the Corinthians pledged to help.
Which, by the way, let's since you brought that up, we didn't read that verse. So this is verse 11. It says, "Now finish the work so that your eager willingness to do it may be matched by your completion of it according to your means." And so we see that there was a pledge there, and Paul's now challenging them. Meet that pledge that you did. Yeah.
Yeah. I wonder what that looked like. Like whenever they actually went ahead and pledged that. And then apparently some time had gone by, and it's easy to not go on and follow through with what you've said that you're going to do.
It's so easy, right? Because your heart gets bigger than your wallet, right? And so there's been times in my life that, God leads me to do something, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to do this. And then all of a sudden, like, time gets away from you, money gets away from you, or whatnot. And it's much harder to meet, to allow, as Lee said, allow your walk to meet your talk thing. Yeah, I don't know what it looked like. Paul went through many struggles in his life and many trials. And so I don't know if they were just riding and Paul was telling them about his life. And they're like, hey, everyone's like, hey, we should probably help him. You know what, Paul? We're going to send you $500.
Or whatever.
500
denarii.
And then, life goes on and they're like, you think he remembers we said that?
Yeah, surely he forgot by now. Right? Yeah, maybe he doesn't need it.
Yeah, who knows, man? But yeah, Paul's now as a good mentor.
Yeah,
again, it's not only. I don't think it had much to do with the money for Paul. We actually see in Philippians, the Philippian church sent Paul a gift, and Paul actually was like, "I don't need this. Like, why are you sending me gifts?" And so I think it didn't have as much to do with the actual finances for Paul as much as it had to do with y'all aren't honoring your words and you're missing out on the blessings that come from generosity.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Where they get to, in that context, they would then get to take part in spreading the gospel.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the, just to be clear, right? That's the blessing. There, right.
Yeah, and that's what you generally see, because you have people who are called to go on mission, right? And we all aren't called to go on mission.
Like international mission? Is that kind of what you're talking
yes,
about?
yeah. Or at least like leaving your current space in terms of like let's say Azel. Like leaving Azel full time to go somewhere else. Because
North America or worldwide.
Yeah. Like, because we would all be nomads, right? Like none of us would ever stay in one place at all. Some of us are called to be on mission. I think that's what you're getting at.
Yeah.
Where we currently are.
Right.
But some of us are called to actually take the gospel out to unreached people groups, which is more what Paul was doing, going out and starting new churches. Not everyone's called to do that, but we're all called to take part in it. And so what you see here and even what you see now is, okay, I might not be called to go on international missions, but I can still take part in that and help fund it. Right. Which is where the Southern Baptist says like the IMB and the NAMB.
Yeah, exactly. And that's part of the reason that the Southern Baptist Convention exists.
Yeah.
Is so we can pool our resources to be able to support missionaries to go take the gospel places that, the average, believer out of us, wouldn't normally be able to go. Or
our
even
church,
missionaries.
our church by itself can't support a full-time missionary, but our church, along with 20 other churches, can.
Right.
And that's kind of what the IMB does, is it organizes and trains and sends out.
Yep, exactly.
International Mission Board, by the way, if you don't know what that means.
Yes.
And so, I think that's what Paul was trying to get them to, is like, more than you, out more. Okay, so, the grace of giving, which kind of tells us it is a spiritual discipline. It is like just as much as we're disciplining our speech, as he said, and our faith and hospitality and all that, we should also discipline our giving and our generosity. If that's something that you're not doing, then you might take a look at that.
Yeah.
Move forward. All right. Next point that Pastor Lee got into is that not just giving is a grace, but giving is also proportional, which this is more pragmatic. But it's worth noting that Paul says that they should give according to their means. And so, are you rich?
I actually have a story about that. Okay. So
that means yes, right?
No.
It sounds like he's rich. Does that sound like he's rich?
I think it's,
Jacob's finding lunch today.
There was
a good.
So this past Sunday in our small group, we were talking about, I don't even remember, somebody brought up, in your sermon you were talking about Bill Gates and how much money would be on the ground. It'd be worth his time to pick it up. And it had to be however many thousands of dollars, and $100 bill on the ground doesn't faze Bill Gates, and so somehow we got talking on that, and I pick up every penny that I find. Some of in the group, and I was like,
boomers.
They're not boomers, I can tell you that. This is 30s, 40s.
No offense, any boomers out there.
And so. No, I'm like, dude, if there's a penny on the ground, like, I'm walking by it. Like, there's just, no, I don't think so. I'm like, I'll pick up a quarter, nickels and dimes. Like, the kids have fun with those. And so we were kind of talking and, we're laughing about it. And so, I'd pick up a quarter. But, and then somebody in the group goes, man, I really wish I had a pastor's salary. Man, he wouldn't even pick up a penny or a dime, like insinuating that I get paid a lot. And I just laughed and said, "Oh, you'd be disappointed."
Yeah. So, it probably depends on the church.
Yeah, probably.
I'm sure there's some pastors out there that make a ton of money. Kenneth Copeland.
If we're naming names.
Yeah.
I thought it was hilarious. It was pretty good. Like, no, it's just like,
I don't think anyone's going to marvel at our paychecks.
No. Yeah. It's just, it's really a time thing. It's like, I've got a lot to do, and like, okay, there's a nickel. Okay, whoop-de-doo, it's 5 cents. Moving on. Now,
he was saying, because you're willing to walk over those, man, you must make a lot of money.
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
No, it's more of a laziness thing.
Yeah.
At least for me.
It's like, there it is. I have some of those in my truck. It's fine.
Yeah. I've got a quarter for Aldi. I don't need another one.
Yeah. The quarters, like I said, different store. I'll grab a quarter. But a penny? No.
Yeah. Exciting.
Yeah.
Well, this brings up a good point. Okay, so on the giving according to your means. So, like, obviously, Bill Gates, would be able to give far more than you or I would, or even combined, right? Granted, the heart is what matters.
Yes.
Jesus even addresses this, that there are people giving out the abundance of what they had, and then the woman that gave just 2 pennies, that she gave more than him because her heart was much more in the right place. Like if you have $1 billion and you give away $1 million, wow, that's a lot of money. But in comparison to $1 billion, it's like, what's the relative average for us? If we have $10,000, that's what, $10,
something like that.
$100,
$100. I think.
Yeah, and so it's a lot of money, but it's not actually a divot in the thing, especially if it's just in like, it's $100 million. Who cares?
Yeah.
So you got to keep that in mind. One thing, so whenever I taught in students, I would pose this question to them when talking about giving, and because like the thought process always is, once I make more money, then I'll give, right? It's like right now we're just so tight, and the next time we get like a $10,000 extra on our salaries, then we'll start giving because then we'll have some more bandwidth to do so, and then you get the raise, and just find ways to do it, and it's just constantly kicking the ball down the court. So I always pose this question to the students when I would teach. I would say, okay, let's pretend there's a scenario that you worked really hard today, and you made $10, and you went and bought a pizza. That is your net worth, is this pizza, right? And I ask you, hey, can you give half of that pizza to other people and share with it? The thought would be, I'm not that hungry. I can't eat this whole pizza by myself. Sure. Okay, let's do that. All right, so that's one scenario. The other scenario is, let's say you worked hard your whole life and you built an empire named Domino's. How much is Domino's worth, Judah? Can you look that up?
Right.
So you work your whole life. You slave away. You start as the pizza boy, and you start your own store, build that store up. You're talking about 40 years of your life working away, building this empire until it reaches what net worth?
$15 billion.
15 billion.
Wow.
So now you have a empire worth 15 billion, and I tell you, hey, can you give away half of that? Which one's harder, right?
Yeah, that one.
Yeah. And you would think that would be much easier because you still have 7.5 billion, right? Like, yeah, right.
You would think. Yeah.
You would think, but it's much harder to give away that because, like, it's, and Jesus even says this, if I can trust you with a little, I can trust you with a lot, right? And so I would tell students, and they all kind of push back on that. It's like, no, I would give away half of it. I was like, bull. It's like, they're like, I give away half of it. I still got $7 billion. And I'm like, you wouldn't give away half of it. And I told them, here's how I know you wouldn't give away half of it, because you don't even give away what you have now. It's like, if you won't give away part of $1, what makes you think you'll give away part of $1 billion, right? And so it's a matter of, according to your means, the numbers don't matter. It's the heart that matters. Yes. And so if you are stingy with a little bit of money, you're going to be stingy with a lot of money, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's all about the heart, right? The person isn't different just because the dollar amounts are the same, right? But yeah, it is proportional. And Lee pointed out that that's even how our like the IRS, how the tax code works, right? It's progressive income tax,
marginal tax rate.
And it was like, oh man, like it just reminded me about taxes.
Which, by the way, I hate marginal. Or well, no, I like marginal tax rate. I hate filing them because like I put in my salary. Or my W-2, and like, oh, we're getting this much money back. I had in Randy's, and all of a sudden it goes down because we crossed that marginal tax rate.
Yeah.
Anyways.
Yeah, that's always fun, isn't it? Yeah. Doing taxes. Oh man, and it. I'll admit, when he's talking about the tax system, I was thinking of all the ways that the tax system could be better. It distracted me a little bit from that subject. I'm like, you could do a consumption tax. That would be good. That way, everything that you're buying, you're paying more of a percentage on. So the more stuff you buy, like the more taxes that you pay, you're not taxed for saving money. And anyways, and then I'm like, whoa, okay, where were we? Like,
dude, you know what's insane? If you think about car tax.
Car tax is insane.
So you buy a car, like you buy a brand new car, and you pay taxes on it, right? Makes sense.
Yep.
Then you sell the car to me. I go and pay taxes on it.
Yep.
And then I sell it to Judah. He goes and pays taxes on it. Then Judah sells it to someone. So
that same car.
It'll eventually get to the point that there is more paid in taxes on that car than the car was even worth in the very beginning.
Yep.
That's crazy.
Government's going to get theirs.
They're going to get theirs, man.
They know what they're doing. Yeah. They're not dumb.
Or even, I was going to say homes. Like eventually, if you live in a home long enough, you'll pay more in taxes than you did on the home. But at least that makes a little bit more sense because
it's not depreciating and all
yeah.
that.
Well, and also those taxes go to the actual community, like schools and whatnot. So it makes a little bit more sense that you're paying a little bit. You're paying less on like the actual home value and more on the community, like what you're getting out of the community. So taxes, man.
Yeah, taxes.
I've considered, so Lottie's getting old enough that we do want to start teaching her stuff like this. So she got, $100 from someone for Christmas, and we didn't want to just give her the $100, like go wild.
Well,
right?
Why not? That'd have been a blast.
And so
let's go to the candy store.
Yeah, so we told her you can buy one toy with this, and she chose The Secret Life of Pets, like the movie, so she could watch it. And what we want to do is start teaching her to give on that. So it's like Dave Ramsey, they teach like you can do 3 things with money. You can spend, you can save, and you can give. And as a parent, what you want to do, and not only yourself but with your kids, is start to incorporate those values in them. It's like, okay, you can spend, you can save, you can give. You should do all of that with the money that you get. So you should spend some, go buy a toy. You should save some. Let's set aside, 10, 20% or whatever. And you should give some. Okay, let's give 10% to, the church or whoever or whatever. But it's just kind of building out that generosity muscle, that saving muscle, that spending. Well, we don't need help with the spending muscle. We got that.
Yep.
I don't know what got me on that subject. So the taxes. So one of the things I thought about doing was imposing a family tax. It's like that you got to give 5% of whatever you make to the family tax, but not. It doesn't go into my bank account. It goes into a side bank account, and then at the end of the year, we all come together and democratically decide, what do we want to spend this money on? Do we want to go buy a new board game? Do we want to go out to eat or whatever? And so teaching them the idea of you pay in taxes, but then you also should, in theory, get a community benefit out of those taxes.
Yeah. See, I teach my kids more of a federal tax kind of a system. For them, it's really less about money. I've started paying them to do little jobs around the house, and especially when they want to buy something that gets them, motivated. It's like, the house is a mess. Y'all have wrecked it. Let's spend some time cleaning. So what I'll do on the front end is we'll do family contributions, which is what my mom used to call it growing up. It's like, you have to do a couple of chores first, and then anything you do above that, I'm happy to pay you for. And so they always they'll have to do their family contributions first, right? Kind of contributing to the family that way. And to be fair, they also made the mess. So, but I also want the house clean. So it's like we're at this impasse, and then pay them over, pay over whatever they do extra after that. As far as taxes go, I don't go on and take a percentage or anything from what they make. It's not a bad idea. Maybe I should. And then, but then the problem is they're going to want more because they're going to account for that tax, and so they're going to demand higher wages,
higher minimum wage.
Yeah, for cleaning the toilet or whatever they're doing. And so anyway, what I've done is the dad tax. When I'll go, we're going to stop at the convenience store and get a bag of candy or whatever.
Take some of the candy.
It's like, hey, dad tax. And like, without hesitation, they know. Like at this point, they're used to it. They're like, why are we pay dad tax? We're like, well, children, sit down. Let me teach you. I am the government. And
it all goes back to Thomas Sowell. I don't know if he has anything to do with taxes, but yeah. That's fun.
Yeah.
This is what you get to look forward to, Judah. With kids, is how do you teach them about life? that, because you don't want them to learn about taxes when they get their first check. Because have you seen that video?
Oh, 100%.
Where this kid,
he's smiling.
Yeah, he's like a 16, first job. He has his first paycheck.
Yeah. He's done the math in his head, like, okay, I work this many hours, I get paid this many hours a week. I know what my check is about to be, and it's going to be sweet.
Yeah, he opens up the check, and he's just like looking at it in disbelief. It's like, what the heck? What's going on?
Yeah, he's... who is Medicare? Medicaid?
And why are they taking my money?
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Oh, goodness. Yeah.
Yeah, in the video, they're laughing at him. Oh.
Yeah.
He's mad. Like, yeah.
Or even like sales tax. So I remember I was in college. I had saved up from working at the movie theater like $1,000 to buy a computer. I wanted a MacBook. And I go to the store to buy it, which is like $1,000. I'm like, I got $1,000. It's $9.99. Boom, there we go. And then we go check out, and it's like $10.80. And I'm like, I don't have $80. I have $1,000. And it didn't occur to me that there's sales tax. Luckily, my brother was he was a good big brother in that moment, and he bailed me out. And,
nice.
Paid the difference.
That was nice.
But yeah, so you want to be able to teach those life lessons.
Yeah, you don't want to get there to the register and
How does that tie back into the sermon?
Yeah.
I would not tax my daughter $100 on $100, right? They would be according to her means.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Yeah. There we go. We're all back.
It does bring up another good point, like that's tied to the sermon. Mm-hmm. Taxes are like compulsory. Like you have to pay your taxes, right? And we may not have a good attitude about taxes all the time. And part of it is, we're not sure.
It's because they do it without us even knowing.
Yeah, exactly. Before they just take it out, like they did the work. But and it's hard to keep track of. Federal spending is crazy. And I think that's part of it. Is part of the reason that we tend to not appreciate taxes as much. But for the church, right? It's not compulsory, right? It's out of the abundance of your heart. To enjoy that grace of giving. And then the nice thing is here, our budget isn't like anything like the federal government's budget.
Yeah.
And so, like Pastor said,
we actually only spend what the budget says.
Yeah, that's right.
If that.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it would be like, so the budget this year is, what is it, $900,000 plus or minus? It's a little over that. It's like, okay, we're going to write a budget, and we are going to spend $17 million this year. It's like, that's how the government acts and works. We're not going to...
like midway through the year, we have to have a new budget proposed to amend it, to increase it.
We borrow money from Japan or China to make it happen.
Yeah.
And anyway.
We borrow money from Ash Creek or one of the other churches.
Yeah, I hope they don't come knocking, demanding the payment back. But
okay. That's another record.
Yeah. So, but all that to say is, Pastor rightly and made it clear at the very beginning of the sermon that there is responsibility, right, with what we do as the church staff and him as the pastor. Like, okay, we're accounting for every dollar, right, that gets spent, and is it going to be spent for something that's furthering the kingdom or not? And like those discussions take place. Yeah.
Really, the way that the church operates on a financial and scale and stuff like that is a macrocosm of how we all should operate in our own lives. Like the money that's given to the church has been entrusted to the church. We are stewards of that money, right? And so the decision that we should make should all gear out of, this isn't ours, it was entrusted to us, now how can we best utilize it for God's kingdom? We should be asking that same question in our own lives. Like the money, like we all work and we all get our money from working, right? So we feel like we're entitled to that. But in reality, like theologically speaking, we're stewards of that money. Like it's not our money, it's God's money. And so we should, in our own personal lives, have that same mindset of, am I frivolously spending? Am I using my money wisely? Am I trusting God with that money? Am I using my money to further the kingdom? And that doesn't mean that you should never buy anything and that you should always be, sending out every single penny that you have to missionaries. That's not what that means. But what it does mean is that you should you shouldn't be frivolous, and you should always have in the back of your mind, am I being a good steward of what God has given me?
Mm-hmm. Yep, exactly.
Yep. All right. Well, we can go ahead and wrap that up. We've been talking about this for a little bit. But that's the sermon on giving. You can go watch it and see everything that Pastor Lee said. But here's the main crux of it. Giving comes from the heart. It shouldn't be a legalistic thing. It should be a matter of God has given you everything. Now trust God with that. And out of the overflow of that should come generosity towards God, towards others, and so on and so forth. Yeah. Anything else you want to add?
I have a joke.
You have a joke? Okay. All right, we'll hear your joke.
All right. 2 men were shipwrecked. You know this one?
No.
Okay. You just like the start.
You're like prepared.
I don't remember where I first heard this, but I had to go look it up to make sure I didn't butcher it.
All right. Tell us.
Okay. 2 men were shipwrecked and managed to paddle themselves to a deserted island in the middle of the ocean. The 2 men had very, very different reactions to their plight. The first man paced back and forth. His mind raced. He tried to think of a solution to get themselves out of this predicament. The second man took off his shirt, began to sunbathe. He gave no indication of stress whatsoever. He's just chilling. He's like, oh, we're on the beach. Yeah, let's do it. In disbelief, the first man confronted his calm partner. What are you doing? Aren't you worried about how we're going to get home? We'll likely end up as food for vultures. The second man simply responded, I make about $100,000 a week. So what? The first man replied, that doesn't count for anything where we are now. He goes, maybe you didn't hear me, the second man said. I make $100,000 a week. You're deluded, you idiot, the first man shouted. Do you think you can buy your way off this island? Do you think you can order up a 7-course meal? And he said, the second man said, well, I'm also a Christian. And this first guy says, you think being rich and being a Christian is going to get us some supernatural help? Are you counting on a miracle? And the second man answered, I guess I didn't make myself clear. I make $100,000 a week, and I faithfully tithe at my church. I know my pastor is going to find me.
And they're going to know that I'm not there. And they're going to find us.
Yeah, that's right. My absence will be quickly noticed, and which is it's a great joke, but also, Pastor Lee brought up in the sermon that he doesn't track
we
individual.
don't. Yeah. Oh well,
so.
I mean, we as a church track for tax contribution reasons, but Pastor Lee does not see it. We do not hunt people down.
That's right.
You do not go on a backsliding list if you stop tithing.
Right. That's right. And and also sorry if you do happen to make $100,000 a week and find yourself shipwrecked. Pastor Lee ain't coming. Because he doesn't know.
He doesn't know. Yeah. All of a sudden, we can't pay our bills.
Right.
That's a lot of money, $100,000 a week.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
What did you think of that joke? Was it the most amazing thing you've heard all day? You let us know. All right. That's enough of giving. Let's now move into our bad doctrine of the week.
It's the bad doctrine of the week.
All right, Jacob. You have our bad doctrine of the week. Why don't you go ahead and share it?
Yes, I do. Okay, so this is a news story from January 17th, so about a week ago, give or take. And the headline, it's an MSNBC article. It says, Speaker Mike Johnson says that Biden's presidency must be God's will.
Mm-hmm. Off to a strong start. I like it.
Yeah. So what's interesting about this in the headline is that the headline doesn't make a whole lot of sense in a way, because Speaker Mike Johnson he's a Republican. President Biden is a Democrat. Mm-hmm. So what's happening here? What's going on here? So there's actually a video that has one of the members of the press asking Speaker Mike Johnson, they know that he's a Bible believing Christian, and so it's a gotcha kind of a question. Mm-hmm. They're in budget talks right now and trying to get a new budget passed. And speaking of budgets, right, and they're having a hard time doing it. Right, they're having to just extend the previous budget, and they've done it I think 3 times now. And it's this whole thing.
Every year.
Budget fights are always entertaining. Right, pop some popcorn.
Yeah.
See what's going on with this. But as a gotcha, right? This reporter asked, well, so since you are a Bible-believing Christian, would you say that it's God's will that Joe Biden is president? And this is in the video, right? It's not really apparent from the...
Which is, to be fair to him, I don't know how he responds. I would not want to be asked that question on camera in the moment without any like thinking about it beforehand, because I would want to think about my answer on that. Anyways.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so the headline is a little bit misleading. It's not like Mike Johnson, Speaker of the House of Representatives for the U.S. Congress, gets up and he's going to hold a press conference and he says, okay, everybody, I want you to listen. Joe Biden is president because it is God's will, right? And then what's the implication? We do whatever it is that Joe Biden says, right? And so
Christians unite. Let's go.
Yeah. Let's lead the charge and follow him. And so I would love to hear. So that's kind of what happens in the video. Like I said, the article headline is a little bit, maybe a little hair misleading. But what are your thoughts?
Like on that question?
Yeah. Now, see, I'm turning it and asking you live on camera.
Just as I said, I would hate to be asked that question without previously thinking. I'm getting asked that question.
If you want to think about it, I can weigh in too. But
So here's my knee-jerk reaction: is that God is over all, and nothing happens outside of his purview, and sometimes that means, or even when people are in power that aren't following God, that doesn't mean that God's will is being thwarted.
Right.
When we talk about governing authorities, there's places in Scripture that talks about God has placed those people in place. Now, here's a weird nuanced aspect of it, is that we see in the Old Testament that God does use corrupt governments to achieve his purpose, right? And so, without getting too political, I'm not necessarily saying that our government is corrupt or that Joe Biden is corrupt. I'm going to leave y'all to come to your own conclusions on that. But just the theory of it is, whether it's Joe Biden or Trump or Obama or Bush or whoever, them being in a place of power certainly doesn't thwart God's will.
Correct.
Now, is it within God's what's the way to say this? Like
providence?
Let's scale it way down, right, to our own personal lives. Let's say I go out and just decide today, I'm just going to live a life of sin. I'm going to go steal. I'm going to go do whatever. Am I thwarting God's will? No. But am I living within, or am I living in the will that God has laid out for my life? Also no, because God doesn't desire for me to go out and sin today, right? But I'm also not thwarting God's will by going out and sinning. And so this kind of like seeming paradox can hang in tandem with each other, where we can live outside the will of God, yet also not thwart the will of God. And I think if you just scale that way up to national governments, the same can be true. This is good. You can even see this in Israel, right, in the Old Testament. Israel many times did not live within God's will because they were in disobedience to God, moved away from God, yet at the same time they didn't thwart God's plans and God's will, because God actually used their disobedience to bring about the Christ and the crucifixion and the salvation, right? And so we see examples of leaders and countries and nations can live outside of God's will, yet still within God's will.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So there's God's revealed will, right? Which we know by Scripture. Here's everything we need to know about God, about ourselves. Here's everything that we need to know about how we ought to live, how we should go about trusting Christ, right? And then at the same time, though, right? God's that's where I said providence, right? God providentially is sovereign over all things, right? And so God's providence, then in God's providence, yes, Biden is president. That's true, right? Is that what God wants? Like as far as the way that, like what you're talking about, is everything that Joe Biden does as president, and let's just even say that we can even include the government in this, is everything that the government does within God's revealed will? It's like, well, no, it's not, right? But that doesn't mean that God's not in control, right? At the same time, and directing all things the way that He wants to, because He does that, which is great news for us, isn't it? Yeah. Do you have other thoughts?
I'm curious as to how he answered that. Are you able to sum it up?
He kind of stumbled on it a little bit,
which anyone would. I mean, that's a real curveball.
Yeah.
Because you have to be really careful in how we've probably kind of stumbled a little bit. You have to be careful how you say it, because it's not a clear black and white answer.
Right.
Obviously the answer is yes, it's within God's will because it's happening.
Right.
But there's nuance to it.
Right.
As you go deeper down the
right.
hole.
The trouble is the implication.
Yes.
Right? The implicit implication that the question, that's really what the question was saying.
Yeah.
Right. It was getting at is, shouldn't you just do what Biden wants you to do because he's president and it's God's will? So he kind of fumbled around a little bit. He didn't he didn't answer it quite as well as I would have, as I thought he could have. But he did say, "Oh yeah, I am a Bible-believing Christian. This is something that the Bible says." And then kind of the last part, as far as what that actually means, he kind of, it was a little bit lacking, I thought.
Yeah. So I think if I was to answer it from a stage standpoint, I think I would say, yeah, certainly this is within God's providence, and God has allowed these things to happen. And but we also know that God calls us. It's while these authorities are in place, we see both didactically and just descriptive wise throughout the Bible that even though there can be corrupt leaders in place under God's providence, that doesn't excuse us from holding them accountable,
right?
And striving for righteousness, not only within ourselves but within the governments and things like that.
Yeah, and really, I think the best way that he could have answered that back is yes, God does in His providence raise up different rulers or leaders. And so yes, Joe Biden is president because ultimately it's God's will. It's right. It's within His providence. But then he should have said, and I'm also speaker because of God's providence as well. And so this clash is imminent.
Right. Well, I mean, you could even see that, again, if we go back to Israel is a great case because you have a ton of case studies essentially of what's going on. And let's take that. Now, Mike Johnson's not a prophet of God, but let's just compare those two in that example of you may have the king who's very corrupt, yet there's the prophet Jeremiah who's called to call that king to repentance, right? And so two things can be true at once.
Yes.
That on one hand, that person has been placed there by God, and on the same hand, they're not living in accordance to God.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Judah, you got thoughts?
I was going to mention the Kings thing too. But yeah, that's about it.
I stole it.
Yeah, that's too bad.
Yeah. Next time.
You
got to be quicker.
Yeah.
All right. That's an interesting one. That's kind of a little bit more of a head scratcher.
Yeah.
It
was fun.
What do you think? How would you answer that question? Just type it all out in the comments for the world to see.
I have one more thing to say.
Okay.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please make sure to like and subscribe. This will, if you just answer this question, it's a tipping.
Have you been satisfied with the service on your podcast today?
You've been satisfied.
There's going to be a prompt down below. Be sure you answer that.
There's what do they call them? Super thanks now on YouTube.
Right. Super thanks.
I think it's on videos now where essentially you can tip on a video and give them a super thanks. I think that's what it's called.
Yeah. Donate.
Our channel's not monetized, and so I think we need 1,000 subscribers and so many watch hours. We're almost to 300 though. So if you subscribe, we will slowly get closer to 1,000, and then we can monetize the channel and use all that funding for God's kingdom.
Oh,
Wow.
yeah. Awesome.
The tens of pennies that we'll make can go to it. Anyways. All right. We are glad that y'all joined us. We hope you have a great day. We'll see you next week.